fine people. Esther here with a little video to relate to this month's tarot challenge, this mindful tarot challenge of June, spread the joy. And before I dive in, let me just say I'm a little self-conscious because my hair is going through one of those awkward, tween phases where I think I look a little bit like a bad version of Jane Fonda in Clute. So anyway, but it is what it is, right? And the sun is shining and I'm healthy and safe and sound, and the people in my world are also healthy and safe and sound, and the animals in my world healthy, safe and sound. And the green, this Oregon green, it's beautiful. Birds are twittering. Anyway, okay, so bad hair or not, let me dive in. So the idea of the Spread June challenge is just to think a little bit more deeply about spreads. Now, the default for so many of us is to think about spreads topically and by position. This is a way of doing spreads that goes back at least as far as, Arthur Edward Waite pretending to discover the Celtic cross and laying out the 10 cards and saying this is what each position means, and creating a kind of a little visual poetry. But the number of cards and even their spatial arrangement is less significant than the topics assigned to each position. Now, there's a place for that kind of topical spread. And in fact, many of the spreads I do have an element of topicality to them. So even when I'm doing something like the roots and canopy, I'm thinking about how one of the cards represents what is the root and the other represents what is the canopy. But underlying my relationship to spreads, and this is the invitation to you, is to think about number, to think about the ways in which the tarot is always teaching us about that structure of numerical sequence and order. And one of the finest, most powerful ways in which the tarot teaches us about number is in the major arcana. And the tradition going back to the Visconti Sforza, but certainly in the Marseille tradition, the iconographic tradition there that gives us a sense of how numerical order and spatial arrangement produce meaning. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about, for instance, a card like the Chariot, and I'm using the Tarot Noir here because that's what I was playing with today. But here's a card that has 3 major elements that invokes the Platonic myth, the allegory of the soul in the Phaedrus, where the soul, ego, self is like a charioteer driving 2 different horses, a good horse and a bad horse, a spirited, noble horse and a kind of a horse driven merely by kind of the fleshly appetites. And so this imagery calls that forth. And then if you think about this in the Waite-Smith tradition with the black and the white sphinx, where it's really explicitly a card about wrestling with opposites, with opposing forces, right? So this teaches us something very profound about the number 3, even though this is also a card numbered 7, right? But its spatial and visual arrangement tells us something about the number 3. It tells us how 3s in the land of tarot and in the land of geometry and in the land of nature, 3s are so deeply about this, that, and what arises out of that tension between the this and the that. 3s are about synthesis. They're about a growth that comes out of the dynamic relationship between 2 reflecting 2 duality pieces, right? Tarot teaches us about 3s in a lot of ways, right? The figure of temperance, what it means to blend 2 opposing elements, what it means to create a concord of discord. Tarot teaches us about threes in terms of power. What does it mean to be in hierarchy in relationship to your two acolytes? Or it teaches us about power in the, oh, do I have the devil here? I might not have the devil here. Here I do. In terms of the fetters, the chains that we are unable to break, right? In a lot of ways, the devil is a kind of, people often talk about the devil thinking from the Waite Smith imagery as a kind of companion card to the lovers. But in the Marseille tradition, where the lovers has two female figures for the male, the devil card really seems like a kind of companion or alternate piece in relationship to the chariot, where instead of working with tension to move the will forward in the devil card, we have opposition. So I'm talking about threes here, but what I'm pointing to is the ways in which the imagery of the tarot can help us design spreads that relate to that numerical order that's been revealed. So my chariot spread, which is a 3-card spread I'll talk more about in week 3 of June, when I load up a video about that spread. My chariot spread is a 3-card spread that works with the structure of 3 that the chariot reveals. How do we harmonize two opposing forces? But this week 1 of June, I'm talking about 1-card spreads. And in my intro to the challenge, I talked about the ways in which the aces teach us about ones by giving us a sense of that seed or potential from which the energy of the suit evolves. The aces as 1 cards teach us about potential. But we can also think about the 1 card, and here it matters that I'm working with a Tarot de Marseille deck, the 1 card that is strength. It's 1 insofar as it's the card numbered 11. So I think about the tarot's major arcana as providing us 2 decades of 10. If the major arcana is telling the story of how the Fool, that 0 card, gets to the world, that 21 card, in between we have 2 decades of 10. And in the Tarot de Marseille, strength begins the 2nd decade. It is parallel to the magician, right? Parallel to this guy with all of his tools in hand, ready to manifest, to make reality or a facsimile thereof appear. In the Tarot de Marseille, opposite that figure in the 2nd decade of the major arcana is strength, la force. So, what is a 1-card spread? If we think about it as a strength spread, what is it about? Well, for me, what strength tells us is it tells us about the ways in which, even to be a unity, a one, singular, we need to balance the relationship within us of the lion and the lady. That wildness within us and that gentility, right? Civilization and its discontents, like the wild and the tame. That's what strength is about as an image of unity, of oneness. So I today did a strength pull, a one card pull about strength. And the card I got was the 3 of Swords. I've been dealing with grief and the 3 of Swords, with heartbreak a lot this week. So it was perhaps no surprise to pull it again today. So how does a strength pull, a strength spread that yields the 3 of Swords, how do I understand that? Well, if the strength spread is about that which is wild within me and that which is also tame, then the wildness is what has been broken, what I don't understand, what I cannot master, what remains in shadow for me, right? That which, let me put down these cards so I can talk about this card. That which, right? That which pierces through, that breaking inside, right? That breaking inside that I cannot master, and yet the part of me that tries to hold it all. This is what visually the Three of Swords in the Marseille tradition depicts, right? It depicts a kind of piercing, that which creates a whole, and also our attempt to contain that with this almond shape, this mandorla, right? Yeah. So here's this thing about the Three of Swords in the Marseille depiction. It always, 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 although this isn't quite right, but it always reminds me of an eye, you know, and I always hear that pun on the first person pronoun in English. I and I, right? Me, ego. And so much the Three of Swords is about this challenge to ego. And the number one is paradigmatically about ego, right? So what a perfect card to pull for my strength one card spread. But it reminds me of an eye, that pupil, that hole that lets the light in, right? And yet it's a black hole. That's what our pupil is. It's an aperture. We see because we have this hole in the center of our eye. We have this piercing through, this break, this heartbreak. We can't master that emptiness, that injury, that wound. We can't master it. We just hold it. Like we hold our grief, like we hold our broken heart. So that was my reading for today. I would like to have a reading one of these days that doesn't deal with grief or with towers or with any of that fine stuff, but you know, we take what we get, which is also the message of the Three of Swords. Okay, I hope this makes sense. I hope it's useful. I hope it's helpful. One card spreads. I encourage you to look at the one cards or the depictions of oneness in the tarot and use what the tarot is telling you about ones to build a sense of what you're doing with a one card pull. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay. As always, thank you for your practice. Toodaloo.